How do you do, everyone? How's it going today? My name is Carpo. For those who may not know me, I generally, when I make a video like this, it attracts people who are not my usual subscribers, and so if I get some new people, hey, how you doing? I make videos about every subject you can imagine, but whenever I talk about politics, it always seems to, well, let's just say that when you're talking about philosophy that regards politics, altruism, and especially Ayn Rand, which I'm going to be mentioning here, I'm sure that people will have a few opinions on the subject. So I should start off by, I'm going to do my best here with what I've got. I have several notes that I've been taking throughout the day, and I'm using Ayn Rand as an example here because she would call herself a moral objectivist, if you will. Ayn Rand was born in 1905 and died in 1982. And she wrote the book called Atlas Shrugged, which, if you will, she believed in this laissez-faire type economy. She was a full-blown capitalist and believed that the market should regulate itself. She also believed that that altruism, that taxation was all morally wrong, or should say altruism being forced to give to others. And her policies have been used in modern politics by many people. I'm going to start off with the preamble here because I want to make sure that I have a few notes that I want to get clear before we start. First, I'm not a conservative and I'm not a liberal. I know that people will always ask, hey, which one are you? You're one or the other, and they tend to have this idea that you can't just be, I consider myself a rational thinker, but like I mentioned earlier, if you can't change your ideas, I said this to someone earlier, people, if you don't change your clothes, you start to stink, and if you don't change your ideas in your mind when they need to be changed, then you get in the same problem, but we're called flip-floppers if we change our values or our ideas or morals, so we tend to stick with what we've been taught and what we've heard is right. And this causes a lot of problems. This is not just politics, but also religion. And whatever we've been taught, and we tend to carry it on without questioning sometimes, and that makes it difficult in politics for us to get anywhere. So if your parents were conservative, you're conservative, that type of attitude. And that's changing, but it's still out there. So it's not a liberal or conservative issue, it's a thinking issue. And if you want to talk about liberals, you'd have to talk about social liberalism versus classical liberalism, because classical liberals were a completely different badge. So in this case, let's just throw out the catchphrases and the terms and get to the bottom of how to run a better economy and world, if you will. No one person ever gets it all. No one person understands the whole picture. So even someone like Ayn Rand, for example, she had a lot of followers, and in fact, one thing I found out, that it was Alan Greenspan was one of her followers, one of her groupies that used to hang out. Alan Greenspan is the, chairman for, our economics, if you will. God, what is it right now? Federal Reserve Chairman? Is it? Slips my mind. I think he's Federal Reserve Chairman. But anyhow, these are people who flocked as groupies to hang out with somebody who talked only about being selfish, because her whole thing was about the self, and the self should come first, and that if you want to give to others, you can, but you should never feel obligated to. And that's why I'm talking about it, because it is an issue that philosophies that I've been thinking about for several years now, and have my own kind of ideas about it I'd like to share, I guess. One thing that is interesting is authority. Who is an authority? A lot of people like to say, hey, we don't need people out there in the government telling us what to do, and I'm going to get more into the government issue, but I'd like to point out first that I do realize that authority is necessary on certain subjects, because no one person has it all figured out. And, are you going to be out there figuring out, and fixing the roads and doing these things? Sure, we can do little projects to help out around the country, and we don't necessarily need a government. But we do need experts in certain fields. And so this leaves us open to not always being able to do everything ourselves. And this is why we need social structure. Because if we are innovators, we want to create. And in order to create and move forward, we have to organize that. So we got ourselves into this situation because we wanted to be here. Because we wanted to be able to take a lot of the work and put it off onto someone else's shoulders so we can continue to do what we want to do as individuals. And so it's, it's a give and a take there. And then there's the aspect that some people cannot think for themselves. And that makes it very difficult to know exactly what to do in those situations where we have people who need public services or, health care, or perhaps they're just unable to work, and we say, well, should it be dog eat dog? Is this an issue of survival of the fittest? And a lot of people would say, yeah, people die, people live, that's just how it is. And for one person to say that it shouldn't be that way, or that it should be a certain way, is very difficult, because you can't actually, come to any real universal consensus on why we think the things that we think, and how we got to the state that we're in right now. Here we are. All we know is the politics that we have, so we can't know how it could be. But I'm not going to bring up religion in this, but this is where when we couldn't decide what man's law should be, and we would argue about how to properly run a system, how to properly run a government in, centuries past, it was a lot easier to rule by God. And by putting the fear into the people that the ruler themselves has divine authority, and this is something that most cultures throughout history, if not all cultures, that are, any religious whatsoever, will say that the leader is divinely ruling, that God has chosen them. American presidents have said it plenty of times in the past. George Bush said God wanted him to be president. I mean, these are things that a lot of presidents have said, and a lot of dictators have said as well. So, it's a little different to say, well, God, the universe willed it, and to say that God chose me as a leader. I mean, and the people believe it. So that means if you're disobeying your leader and if you're disobeying the officials in your government, then you're disobeying your leader, then you're disobeying God. And that's the belief that people had for a long time. And that's starting to change. And what's happening is everything's crumbling because of it. And this is why when people say they're taking God out of our country, or we need God in our country, I would say to, that's not necessarily the case. It's not a matter of needing God. If people need spirituality or direction, that's one thing. But needing, anytime God is put into a culture, then it's used against the people as well. So to get into it now, I've got this fly in here that just won't go away, so I'm going to see if I can get him out of here. Shoot, flies, shoot. This will be a kind of a long one, and it might have to be done in a couple of parts. I haven't even really got started yet. So liberalism, there's classic and social, and they're both based on core beliefs. And the core beliefs that we have are the things that we think, well, they're core beliefs. I mean, I can't really sit and describe everything. It's pretty obvious, I guess. And the fact that we have a government, our government was created by us to protect us against one another. And it's more or less their only job, not just people, external threats, but threats within, and to settle disputes. When landowners have a dispute over something, the government has a system in place, and the rules and regulations that we have chosen, and this is in theory, and the government upholds those choices that we've made. Now, this is just in theory, and in practice it doesn't work, and especially in a country this large. So, Ayn Rand, the reason I used her in the beginning is because, and I watched a couple of her interviews and read some of her excerpts before this, so I could get a deeper idea of, how to approach this idea because the thing is, she had some great ideas, and I understand where she was coming from with the idea that we don't need government, that we should be able to make our own choices. But she didn't believe in abolishing government altogether, and that's a misconception. She also didn't support anarchism. So she couldn't stand liberals. She hated hippies, and but she also really had a lot of conflicts of interest in her own thought patterns. She had, supposedly she had criticized draft dodgers, but at the same time didn't believe that, she believed in the freedom of an individual, and she criticized the war. This is the thing, the point I'm making is that she's human. And any group of people who follow someone who's a human are bound to get into the situation where they are, I'm going to get that fly, where they are listening to a person based on that one person's interpretation of the world. And that gets us into trouble all the time. This is why there are no gurus. There are teachers. There are people who can give you lessons. But when you go to school or go to college, you don't get all your education from one person. You go to multiple classes, and it's the same way with the teacher. When people follow one guru, I can't think of one person that I would follow blindly without questioning. And the thing about Rand was that if you ever questioned her on something and didn't agree with her, she would become defensive and arrogant. And that's something I've seen a lot of people who tend to be very free market oriented. That's what they believe. You know, it's my way or the highway kind of thing. And that's what the selfish nature brings. So I'm not going to say much more about Rand. What I did want to say is that I found out for a few decades she was addicted to Benzedrine, or bennies. Benzedrine tablets were pretty widely used back in the 50s and 60s, and I guess for a few decades she took those, and I thought about it, because it would help her write late into the night. They're amphetamines, for those who don't know. And the thing about amphetamines is that they can create a false reality in your own mind, especially, say, meth. People who use meth heavily find out that it can cause you to really not care very much about other people's feelings and become almost a little bit sociopathic. And I'm not saying that that happened to her, but it's just an example of, let's say a person has something, you know, they're taking a substance that changes their behavior, or maybe they just have a certain mental issue that causes them to believe something, such as a person who has mass delusions or hallucinations and gets a bunch of people to follow them thinking that they're some god or guru, when in fact they just have a mental disorder. Is that harmful if the people are happy? It can be, and that's why people can fall into traps and delusions. Does it really matter if people are deluded? That's up to them. I mean, who am I to say? So the one thing about government, you know, the question is, am I my brother's keeper? And when people talk about removing government, they say, what about those who need it? And the question, with the free market, people say if there's a free market where people are able to do whatever they want and there's no regulations put on them, then companies would monopolize entire industries, make shitloads of cash, hire private armies of their own, and basically rule the land. But the counter-argument against that is that we've never seen it happen. We've never actually seen a free market without regulation, so we can't say what would happen. But my thought is that if the people weren't prevented by laws from acting out how they truly feel, then these companies wouldn't dare step on the toes of the people. In other words, if one company decided to monopolize and was raising the prices of basic needs, food, medicines, let's say, then the people could march down to the pharmaceutical companies and voice their displeasure and congregate in large groups. And it could seem like anarchy at first, but in reality, I think when something like this, if it was able to balance out, let's say, where companies knew that if they fucked up, they would be held accountable by the people, not by silly laws that they can change. And that's just the thing. If government worked and the regulations worked as needed, then they could help us regulate, say, carbon emissions, let's say from vehicles. But then you have people coming into office who decide that they're just going to remove those carbon emission standards because they're asked to by large corporations and companies, because they are helping companies make money by removing regulations that the people want. That's when government stops working, and that's what we have in the United States right now. And many other countries, they're catering to the needs of the companies, not to the people anymore. So at that point, the government itself becomes irrelevant. And then the people start speaking up and get frustrated, and everybody handles it in different ways. So, you know, my question about when people say that, and the thing about people being rich, I got to make sure this camera is still going. Oh yes, I've got a crappy camera and sometimes it shuts off on me. The thing about people who are rich, and the question is this, when we talk about those who are rich and saying that they would just continue to hoard more and more, the thing is, even with government, they do it anyway. The thing is, when our government is allowing the money to be printed, see, without government, there would be no money. The money would have to be our own promissory notes. And yes, small banks would pop up, there would be forgeries. We would have to work that out as a society. The question is whether or not the benefits outweigh the downfall of having millions of people in government positions doing jobs and wasting money for things that we don't even need. Meanwhile, people are still suffering, and we're spending over half of our budget on the military, which is mostly overseas. And I'll get to the military issue, but the question is, when we talk about the rich, you say, are the rich really greedy? Now, if there was a system in place, which there pretty much already is, where they don't really have to give their taxes, the way that they should. But even if they didn't, and even if it was an open free market and no one paid taxes, the question is, would those who have more help those less fortunate to balance it out? And that's an interesting question, because a lot of people say, well, people are selfish and people are greedy by nature, and that they wouldn't help others. But I don't feel that way. And I feel like I would help others, and I would want to help others. So I start to wonder, is this projection on people's part, them saying that, well, since I don't help others, nobody else would either? How does a person know what they would do with money? Even when the rich give money, people are suspicious of them. Why are they donating? And plenty of billionaires give massive amounts of their money to charity. But people are always suspect because there's money involved, and because these people are rich. The rich have always been suspect and always will be. And so I don't know if they would still be greedy, or if it would just continue along the way it is. The rich aren't all greedy. People give away money all the time. So it depends on who it is. Nobody knows, because it's never been enacted. A government without a government. There are no new ideas in politics. I was trying to come up with a quote. There's no new ideas in politics. Only new people presenting the old ones with a renewed vigor, if you will. And that's something you find out. A person gets, they have all this motivation to change everything, and then they get sucked into the system. And it shouldn't be that way. When we talk about the system, we're talking about something that's supposed to be run by the people, so we know that there's a fault there, there's something wrong. And I'm bringing up these points because that shows that Rand in many ways was correct. She said a government that, isn't for the people and that's for the corporations, we will have all types of financial disasters, and people will stop respecting their own country, and it turns into a chaos. Altruism's never been fully tested in a free market. So we can only guess on that one, and I don't really have an opinion on whether it would work or not. But one thing I do know that would help is public shaming, because a lot of these larger corporations, now that we have the internet in play and that we're much more connected, it's not like the past where you can hide something. When a company fucks up today, they are publicly shamed and humiliated by people. So if you look at what happened with the airlines, Delta. Now, people still have to fly. The airlines know this. So they'll still have customers. But when it comes to choosing between which popsicle to buy, or where you want to buy the wood to build your desk, or which, any product that you want to buy, you have the choice to look into it. And if people were more vigilant about it, right now we believe that government's protecting us. A lot of people do. And that if they buy a medication or a pill off the shelf, or an herb or something off the market, that it must be safe because the government's protecting them. And that's the falsity. That's the problem. We'd be much more vigilant and cautious about what we take if there was nobody looking out for us except for ourselves. We would have to organize this, which is basically what we already have, a community of people who do these things. We don't need others doing it. We don't need a big brother doing it for us anymore. But there are still some who want to continue along this same path, and I guess I'm kind of getting off topic a little bit there. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have a government. I'm just saying that what we have right now, it doesn't work. So public shaming is a good way to police ourselves. And the question here becomes, why we need defense in the war over resources. So before I flip the page here, in theory, government is a great thing, and in practice, it's a fucking disaster, what we have implemented right now. I guess I should just run over this part really quick because I don't want to make a second video here. The results of no government. It's nearly impossible to imagine with not having a government. The thing is, tribes always get bigger. And that's what's happened. That's why we have governments. I tried to note a few of the things that we need government for. The first one is that we need defense. But that brings up the secondary question, against whom? Because if you're not invading someone else, how can you be so sure someone's going to invade you, type of question. But there will always be somebody who wants to take charge, somebody who wants to take more than their share, and that's why we need government to at least organize a small faction of military for defense, homeland protection, not security, but homeland protection. You're never totally secure. That's just the way it is. You have to realize that. So the next one, besides defense, is infrastructure. And the problem with that is always that they say the poor areas would suffer, and they probably would. So they would need donations. The question goes back to, would people with more give more? And would those large corporations help build roads in smaller towns? They know that if those areas aren't taken care of, then those people will move closer to the cities, and but it's already that way. It doesn't change. The poor areas right now aren't being fixed. There's potholes in the roads, and there's fucked up water in Michigan and everywhere else. So what's the government doing to help the infrastructure now? So that one's off the table. I would say that we're better off taking care of our own at this point. The third one is healthcare. Do we need the government for healthcare for people? And that's one of the hugest issues, which is why it requires a video all its own, totally separate. The question is, should it be socialized? And if there was no government interference, one thing would be that without regulations, let's say, and laws on medicines, companies wouldn't be able to create a medicine and market it and charge you $50 a pill if the generic laws were removed, to where companies could make a generic instantly. And people say, well, that would take away the innovation of new medicines. No, it wouldn't. If there's even a slight profit margin to be made off of medicine, people will invent it. And if the regulations were removed, also that would take away the testing, to make sure it's safe. But how has the medication been safe for us? People die all the time from prescription meds. So perhaps we'd be better off on that one, just saying no laws. Let people, figure out the system themselves. I mean, if hospitals are going to charge $40 for a Band-Aid, something needs to be done, and it seems like the government's not fulfilling their obligations on that one whatsoever either. And the final one is disasters and emergencies. And the thing is that the problem's too big. If there's too big of a disaster, they're not going to be able to help anyway. And we've already seen that happen, like with what happened with Katrina, and what's going to continue to happen. Anytime there's a disaster, the government can only do so much. They send in who they have. But if it was a huge nationwide disaster, nobody's coming to bail us out. So we are better off on our own on that one. And perhaps people wouldn't build below sea level if they knew that they wouldn't be bailed out when their houses were flooded. I hate to be brutal, but we have to be smarter about where we build. People who want to live on a pristine, beautiful beach have to realize that their house will be flooded one day. And that's, the reality of living in a dangerous area. It's always been this way. And we can't stop that. So companies have to earn the trust of the locals, or not, they wouldn't be allowed in their cities. So, for example, if there weren't regulations, the companies could grow too big. But if people didn't like the company, I hate to say, they'd firebomb it or not allow them to even build. I mean, and maybe that sounds a little bit anarchist, but right now we're just completely being screwed either way. So, yeah, companies could monopolize with cash, sure, but when cash really has no value, when you've flooded the market with cash, we're in the same situation as we're in. So all the things that I just read that the government's supposed to help out on, the only one that they're doing the job is military. And over half that military is overseas expeditions where we are taking resources or creating coups in other countries, not to help us, the people, but over half of our tax money goes to help companies retrieve more oil, retrieve more products, more metals, and that's just the reality of it. Very few conflicts are we out there actually helping people and giving humanitarian aid. You don't see the U.S. military helping people in countries where real genocide is actually occurring if there's no resources in that country. So basically all the U.S. government is a military think tank designed to perpetuate this falsehood that we need to be nationalistic and to help one another. So I went from altruism, right into politics, but the point that I'm asking here is, do we need a government? How much government do we need? And would we be better off governing ourselves? And how selfish should we be? Because I really do believe that we need to look out for ourselves first. We're being told this delusion that, all men are equal, and it's just not the fact. You have to earn your equality. You have to treat others with respect in order to earn a place in the world as a respectable human being. Because otherwise, everyone's just equally entitled, and I don't see it that way. So it's a difficult thing to consider that, some people just don't deserve, let's say, free health care because they don't make an effort, or some people don't deserve even love because they don't give love back. We love unconditionally those around us, but at the same time, we have to look out for ourselves. So that's where I'm going. I'm not trying to say we should all be selfish, because in my heart I am altruistic and I want to help others because I enjoy seeing them happy and I like the feeling of helping others. But people would say that that's selfish in its own right. So without getting too deep into it, I'll talk to y'all later and have a wonderful day.